Hey everyone, it's Dr. Ramani and welcome back to this YouTube channel on all things related to narcissism, narcissistic personalities, difficult personalities, and all the difficult relationships that come from this. Today we're going to take on an interesting topic. It's got some interesting terminology you may or may not have heard, but it may help you understand narcissism a little better. We're going to be talking about two concepts called ego-syntonic and ego-dystonic narcissists. Sounds a lot more technical than it really is. But again, if you want to learn about this and you love learning about stuff related to narcissism, please subscribe to this channel. You'll have access to this whole library in one convenient place, but also if you hit that bell, you'll also get notifications each time we put out a new video. So let's talk about this idea of ego-syntonic and ego-dystonic narcissists, or ego-syntonic and ego-dystonic narcissism. So let's consider this video a little bit of a back to school kind of thing. Remember, I'm a college professor as well, so I'm a little bit teachy. And so you can learn some new terms, and by extension though, by learning these terms, you might know a little bit more about the nuances of narcissism. The term ego-syntonic was actually initially used by Sigmund Freud in his book on narcissism. And the terms, though, are now more consistently used across psychology and psychiatry. Okay? So, when a pattern or a personality or behavior is ego-syntonic, the person doesn't really take notice of it. It's sort of who they are. Okay? Now, this is very common. This idea of ego-syntonic qualities is very common in personality disorders. A person with a personality disorder, and you may not know this about someone because only somebody who meets someone directly can diagnose them. A person with a personality disorder doesn't take notice of their patterns, their perceptions, their behaviors, and beliefs. So you get everything that they do, it's just there, it's who they are. And they're a bit taken aback, or they can even be angry when their patterns are pointed out as an issue. When a person does not express distress or concern or an issue with their personality or behaviors or beliefs, we may sort of see it as ego-syntonic. In essence, it fits, right? And this is the case with most cases of narcissism, and by extension, most cases of narcissistic personality disorder. It fits them. So thus, that also relates to the guidance I've given you why you should never call a narcissist out. If something is ego-syntonic, even if the pattern is unhealthy, then the person is not going to think that there's something problematic about it. So any conversation calling a pattern out that you might think is unhealthy, the person who's that style, if it's ego-syntonic, it's not going to go well, especially when they're a narcissist. Like, what are you saying? Like, there's nothing wrong with what I'm doing. And then they'll tend to blame the other person. So on the flip side, what is meant then by something being ego-dystonic? Obviously, it's a little bit of the opposite. Here, when something is ego-dystonic, we see a person whose pattern, they experience it as not fitting them well. In fact, they may be a bit uncomfortable with it. It's not something that they find they can easily change because it is sort of an existing pattern with them, but they're taking notice of it and they're like, I don't want to be this person. I don't like this. They take notice that this style they have isn't good for them, it's not comfortable, and it's not adaptive. Now, interestingly, we can see an ego-dystonic quality also in some personality disorders. For example, in some people with borderline personality disorder, they are very uncomfortable with elements of how they're thinking and behaving. They're very uncomfortable with their black and white thinking. They're uncomfortable with their emotional reactivity or their rejection sensitivity. As a result, they may acknowledge that, for example, their reactivity to certain situations in their life is not healthy. They will acknowledge that their reactivity is causing them more harm than good. They will wish that this wasn't the case about them, but that they're finding it really difficult to change. That's a good example of something being ego-dystonic. But because it is so baked into who they are, how their personality has developed, it is difficult to change. They find it difficult to change. And it's not just as easy as snapping their fingers and wishing it away. They really have to do hard work to not fall into that usual reactivity. Now, I'll give you an example from another mental health issue, okay? There's a good example that's offered in what we call OCD, or obsessive compulsive disorder. Obsessive compulsive disorder is characterized by the presence of obsessions or unwanted and intrusive thoughts. The compulsions are behaviors that are engaged in to manage the anxiety raised by the obsessive thoughts, but which are not meaningfully connected to the obsession. So, for example, a person who has an intrusive thought that they may perceive as a sort of dirty thought may then go and proceed to wash their hands 100 times. Ego-dystonic OCD is then observed in a person who has insight into their disorder. A person with ego-dystonic OCD will recognize that locking a door 100 times is excessive, but they also acknowledge that they do it to manage their anxiety. They recognize that it's a waste of time and that it's making their lives miserable. But then they say it's better than the misery of the anxiety. So they know what they're doing, but like, this is why I'm doing it, because I don't want to feel anxious. In ego-syntonic OCD, the person doesn't recognize the maladaptive nature of the pattern and actually may perceive the pattern as just, it is what it is. Maybe not as good, but it's not, they're resistant to someone pointing out the unusual nature of their behavior. They may even become defensive. Not surprisingly, ego-dystonic OCD is easier to change because a person feels more motivated to change because the symptoms don't fit them. Basically, the more rigid any behavioral or personality pattern is, the more likely it is to be ego-syntonic and thus less likely to change. So, you may be sitting here hearing all of this, and an excellent question right now would be, can a person have ego-dystonic narcissism? And the answer to that is yes. It's not as common, but it can definitely happen. And I get emails from people, and I've worked with clients who have sort of that ego-dystonic narcissism every day. A person who says, hey, doc, I saw your videos. These patterns you're describing, it's me. I don't like it. I can see I'm hurting lots of people. I'm making a mess of my relationships. I'm making a mess of my life. I want to stop, but I don't know how. This distinction between ego-syntonic and ego-dystonic narcissism matters for a couple of reasons. First, it is to understand the likelihood, I should say, of any progress or improvement. Now, you know my stance on this within narcissism. In the majority of cases of narcissism, especially in a case of ego-syntonic narcissism, where the person sees no problem if their symptoms fit them, there's probably very, very little probability of change. But in an ego-dystonic narcissist, there is the possibility that a person may have some incentive to change and even recognizes what needs to change. The challenge is with all ego-dystonic patterns, they aren't easy to change. A person who has ego-dystonic narcissism will recognize a need for greater empathy or thinking before they speak or say something to anyone. But under conditions of stress or disappointment or frustration or shame, all of which are major triggers for rageful, angry, unempathic, or impulsive outbursts, they may not show adequate empathy, but through hard work in therapy may quickly catch themselves and then try, more often than not, to at least try to get it right. Ego-dystonic narcissism is difficult for the person experiencing it because these patterns are so resistant to change, especially under conditions of stress. And then when the person doesn't sort of get it right, for example, they respond in a manner that is not empathic, then they will often become quite remorseful. It's just a step in the right direction. And it can make change feel really challenging. Not to mention that the people around them are also getting really burned out by all of it. So ego-dystonic narcissists, where the narcissism, so those patterns don't fit them well, may feel really frustrated by the process of therapy and by the process of change. And some may even become more isolated because they find that it's very difficult. They struggle to find the workarounds and consistently employ the healthier ways of responding. In the ego-dystonic narcissists that I've worked with over the years, I must say that it would be like they were breaking a sweat. I mean, it's the only way I could describe it. They were breaking a sweat when they were trying to sort of be on, to get it right, to be on with the empathy. And it's almost like it looked like they were someone who was smiling too brightly in a photo, right? They're really almost like it was a theatrical empathy. But I must say, I appreciated the effort. And I would thank them for really taking the moment of being aware of me. But also, keep in mind, I'm their therapist. I'm not someone who's in their life. Ego-dystonic narcissists actually find themselves getting quite exhausted because they do expend a fair amount of bandwidth so that they don't respond in their usual ways. Now, as always, and you should know this by now if you've watched enough of these videos, the backwaters of narcissism are really quite treacherous. Where some of this can get tricky is when an ego-syntonic narcissist future fakes you and tries to reassure you that they know their behavior isn't nice and that they are trying to change it. Remember, ego-syntonic is when they don't see a problem with their behavior, but they know that to get you, they got to change it. One way you can smoke out the ego-syntonic future faking is if they only make these sort of pseudo-revelations only at times when things in the relationship are going south, or you catch them in a lie, or you are threatening to leave. An ego-dystonic narcissist, one for whom they don't like the symptoms, they won't make these kinds of pronouncements of insight only at times of peril when they think they might lose you. And in fact, an ego-dystonic narcissist is more likely to sort of look bummed out when they see what their personality is about and it's not nice, or they get the empathy wrong, like they don't respond the right way in a situation. If you are an ego-dystonic narcissist, it's not a bad sign. The road ahead for you is not going to be easy. But the awareness of the challenges in your behavior and in the challenges in your beliefs and your patterns means that you are actually perceiving a need for change and you see why things need to change. And frankly, working with a very good therapist over time could generate some shift. But I got to tell you, it's going to be a lifelong commitment to mindfulness, to the work. If you are an ego-syntonic narcissist, then you are not likely to be watching this video. If you're in a relationship with a true ego-dystonic narcissist, okay, narcissist is like, I don't want to be this person, then I'm going to warn you, the relationship's still not going to be easy. They are still going to have their bad moments when they are stressed and when they are frustrated, but you may also see some good faith attempts and recognize them. You just have to maintain realistic expectations and be ready for the days when it may not go well. But do not feel that you need to enable, and do not feel that you have to justify their behavior. If you're in a relationship with any narcissist, ego-dystonic or ego-syntonic, you're always well within your rights to set boundaries. And it may be that the ego-dystonic narcissist may be a day late and $1 short with their commitment to change. And you decide that you may wish them well in their journey ahead, but that you may not have the patience for it anymore. Obviously, everyone's story is different. If you are in a relationship with an ego-syntonic narcissist, all you can do is radically accept, because it's really, really unlikely to change. Get therapy, get support, and figure out your best way forward and your best path forward, because since it's not going to change, the best you can hope for is a workaround. So the terms are kind of technical, and I hope it makes sense. But I think if you could understand that for some, it's what some of you might have had different experiences. You might say, it's interesting, I have a narcissistic sister who gets that this isn't okay, and I have a very different relationship with her than I have with a narcissistic husband, for example. So to understand that sort of whether the person sort of doesn't even see a problem, like it, so their symptoms fit them, versus the person's like, I don't want to be this person, it can really create a very different relationship for you. And if you are yourself, you have a narcissistic personality, that ego-dystonic style and a commitment to change can really yield some real dividends, but it does mean a lifelong commitment to the work. Thanks again.